What is your experience with language from younger self to now?
I think it has changed so much. I mean, I grew up with a couple of languages in my home. My dad, his first language is Swiss German, and I spoke it with my grandparents. And then my mom's first language is Spanish, and I spoke it with my other grandparents. And
Mhm.
so there were always those kind of three. Like at home, everyone spoke English, but then with the grandparents, it was kind of speaking those other languages. And
Mhm.
so I think I've always been kind of interested in language on like a subconscious level in the sense of like
Totally.
the pragmatics of it, like when to use what type of register, what type of words, okay, like all of that. And then yeah, I would say that as a child, I spoke the 3 pretty well, but then once I started entering school and all of that, I definitely became super English dominant, and that's just how it is, unfortunately, for people who, had my educational experience where, there aren't many bilingual schools in Miami anymore, and, the ones that there are, a lot of the times are private and expensive, so I had a very monolingual school experience, and yeah, that's that. And then as an undergrad, I studied linguistics and I really loved it. I've always studied theoretical linguistics, which is kind of a really different perspective, I think, than kind of the socio world that I'm in now. And yeah, I think that my undergrad experience just really opened me up to kind of the idea that there's so many different languages and a lot of the times they operate in similar ways, but there's so much difference. And it was
Mhm.
just eye opening. And then now I'm finishing a master's and I think I've really shifted. Thank you, thank you, thank you. The master's is also technically in theoretical linguistics, and I definitely still love syntax and like phonology and all of those things. But I've definitely taken a more kind of socio turn and shift because
Mhm.
I always studied linguistics with the hope of being like an English as a second language teacher. And then when I learned about how, like, I don't know, I just thought it was so black and white, you know? You learn a language, yeah, that's it. And then learning socio, I was like, oh man, like the situation is está grave. Like things are not great.
So
you
what
know.
stuck out to you in terms of that?
Oh, so many things. I think that first, I mean, this is something that I talk to my students all the time. The idea of
Mhm.
like standard language and standardized language. I think so many people just assume that it's like this real thing that like exists in the world and like it's normal to want to strive to this like academic language. And that's really harmful. It's really harmful because, I mean, first, it's an insane advantage when, your home language is kind of similar to the standard language, like I went to school already speaking English at home. So that's a huge advantage. And then, yeah, just the idea that, you know, standardized languages were created and how they kind of, created this kind of language based off of like the elite and that sort of stuff. And I don't know. I think that it just shocked me learning about like how many languages have died like as the rise of
Mhm.
standardized languages have come around, and just how powerful it is as an ideology. And it's something that still to this day I grapple with so much with my students because they think that it's not arbitrary, it's like this real thing, this real like I want to sound American, and all of these terms are so nuanced. What does it mean to sound American? And so, Yeah.
100%.
Long answer.
No, this is my stuff. Yeah, I'm with you 100%. Was there a particular theory or theorist or moment that kind of was like, wait, what's going on here? That kind of like sticks out for you, or that right now is resonating with you in terms of that?
I think that there's a lot of them that come to mind. One of my favorites in general is Libby Green, who
Mm,
writes. Ugh, I love her. All of her writing is just very kind of clear about, you know, these ideologies are things that are taught to children, and like in several different ways. Like we think about other people kind of like through a filter of like biases, and
mhm,
we always put the stress on the speaker, like fix your accent, fix your grammar. And it's like, whoa, 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 why don't we ever look at the listener? Because they have so many biases, and there's so much research where people interpret language differently depending on the speaker. And so that kind of just blew my mind. Even though now it sounds so obvious to me. At the time, I was just amazed. And also, kind of 2 years ago, I listened to Jonathan Rosa speak at an event, and I was just gutted after listening to him because, I mean, talking about sociolinguistics and all of that, um, yeah, it's kind of a similar thing, like this white listening subject, language sounds different depending on who's speaking it. And we're so often looking the other way. And so that kind of perspective shift really changed how I thought about teaching English and just about language in general.
as you learned about these ideologies and these attitudes and beliefs about language, um, were there any moments from your past or your language journey that kind of stuck out for you, that you were like, wait, that's what was going on? Like that
Oh,
kind of.
so many, so many. I think being a heritage learner of Spanish, it's just a hard thing. I always think of those memes that are like protect them at all costs, because it should be like that. Like
Mhm.
I think that for me and so many of my friends growing up in Miami, it's a really hard thing when your parents, a lot of them were totally educated, lived their lives all in Spanish. And so their Spanish is, great. And then as a child, I mean, now I can see that the language is still great. It's just different. But, since we're all in all of these biases, a lot of the times, like my family to this day will be like, "Ooh, your Spanish isn't that great." But then I'll realize that it's so made up because my friends who, moved from Latin America when they were like 15, and, they don't make any grammar mistakes, people still tell them, like, your Spanish has gotten so much worse since you moved. And little things like that make it seem like, oh my goodness, you'll never win. You'll never win because you're not the problem. you know?
100%. Yes, yes. The idea that any language is like the fixed thing that doesn't change.
hmm
That if you just like work really hard, so it's not like moving along and adjusting because that's what languages do, or that's what has happened in the past. We're not acknowledging how language has changed in the past. We're definitely not acknowledging how it's changing right now. So if you keep moving the goalposts, then you're setting us all up, yourself included.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And
no, I felt that way with Richard Ruiz and his ideologies about language is a problem, language is a right, or language is a resource. When I read that, I was like, oh, okay, I get it. So I should have a right to maintain my home language and access new languages, and I should have a right to practice. So have you ever run into any of those ideologies? Language is a problem, language is a right. It sounds like you're on a daily practicing language as a resource. I'm also like interested if those particular ideologies come up for you within your colleagues, within the space where you're with other teachers who are speaking multilingual or who are teaching multilingual students.
right. I mean, I think that kind of, especially with my colleagues at the university, it's kind of just such a different perspective after having like studied all of these ideologies. I mean, we still have so many biases around language. I think that
Mm-hmm.
there's so much to learn and unlearn. But I think that, it's kind of a really special thing like that with my professors. I feel comfortable to email them and speak to them in Spanglish. Like that
Mm-hmm.
just means a lot to me because I mean, growing up, it was just seen as something that should be restricted 100%. You can be bilingual,
Mm-hmm.
but you have to be these like two monolinguals. You have to speak like standardized Spanish and like this standardized English, and to mezclar los dos is a no-no, you know? And so that's something that it was a message that I got from my family, from, in school, in elementary school for sure. Spanglish was a no-no. And so it was really jarring to study even in theoretical linguistics, like psycholinguistics love code switchers because it's so interesting what goes on in the brain and things like that, kind of realizing that, oh my goodness, like maybe code switching is kind of incredible considering we're doing something so complex. We really are. It's showing that both
Mm-hmm.
languages are like alert in the brain at all times, and that, you know, it's all really like pragmatic. I know that you'll understand me, so I can put some little Spanish words in there. And yeah, I think that that has really changed the most for me, kind of going from like restrict Spanglish at all costs and also restricting like Spanish that isn't super, I don't know. I feel like there was always like in school, you can only speak like one form of Spanish, this really
Mm-hmm.
pure like Spanish, and everything else was like, no, keep it at home, which is just so hurtful for students. Like that's their language. That's, and so yes, I think that's kind of one thing that has shifted so much in my life.
Yeah, I feel that. So how do you feel that learning about all of this? Because I felt similar, learning about linguistics, learning about these ideologies, learning about these power systems. For me, it was like, first of all, I felt like I was putting on glasses. I was like, hold on, this is what this looks like. This is what's actually happening. I'm seeing things a little bit more clearly now. It's not that, these students aren't doing what we're asking them to do. It's that we're not setting them up for success. And why would anybody succeed or thrive under circumstances where you're not giving them the tools and the resources, or even creating the space for them to use their tools and their resources? Of course, the system is giving us the outputs that we are inputting, right? So you spoke a little bit about this, but I'm curious if you wanted to add on how has studying linguistics and theory and all of this come together for you in order to empower you as a language, as a speaker of languages, as well as a teacher, a business owner, and all of the aspects? How do you feel it's either empowered you or better prepared you?
Yeah, I think that learning about kind of these ideologies is totally like wearing glasses and seeing everything kind of fresh. And for me, it did have a really profound change in like me as a person and like my language use. And it was really kind of cathartic. I think a lot of heritage speakers just carry around shame and like we just feel dumb a lot of the times. Like everyone's like, why don't you speak perfect Spanish? You've been hearing it all your life. And, if you have no linguistic knowledge, that sounds kind of like that kind of makes sense. Like I have been hearing it all my life. I guess I should be
Mhm.
at this perfect level. But if you learn how languages are learned and the fact that, objectively, my input was like 90% in English, I don't know how that 10% would just skyrocket, you know. I think
Mhm.
that it completely changed my experience and my confidence. Like if someone now makes fun of my Spanish, I will tell them off or I'll just be like, listen here, listen here. This is unacceptable. This ends here. And so that is kind of what I want to kind of share with my students. Kind of, I think that language learning is really kind of emotional in the sense that there's so much shame around it, you know? Like if everything's just right, wrong, mistake, not a mistake, it's just, it feels bad and icky. And I think that for students, I do really want them to, yeah, not only question these ideologies of, whose language is viewed as right and whose language is viewed as wrong, and like who's benefiting from that. I think that's so important. And then also to kind of question these kind of language beliefs that we have in general about how it's learned. And there's just so many myths about that. I mean, the other day, my student was so frustrated that, some days she speaks English better than others. I was like, that's with everyone.
Mhm.
It's not just learners of English. I mean, and then we'll kind of draw on experiences like in our first language. Does this ever happen that some days you write better than others or that you're more eloquent than on other days? And it's just realizing that you are not the problem. It's not that you're not studying hard enough and all of these things. It's kind of, there's just so many falsehoods in the air.
I love that you said after learning this, I felt like, if I ran into those deficit ideas, that essentially I can tell them off, by learning about this, that you essentially not only are on the right track, but you're whole and complete. You're not missing anything. You have assets, you have values, no matter what your linguistic repertoire is. You are complete as you are. And once we recognize that, then we can create those bridges or create the space to add on through that resource mindset. I was listening to one of, I think it was a live that you did. I'm not sure, I'm sorry, with who, but the person and you were essentially speaking to that. Some days you're tired, some days you're this, some days you're like flowing in your second language, some days you can't get anything in your first language. And at the end of the day, it's about having that compassion for yourself, for the whole process, and recognizing that even on a day where, for whatever reason, things aren't flowing the way that you have intended, it is only because you are a whole and complete being who's showing up on any given day to do the work. And so you might be tired, you might not be able to do as much as the day before, and then the next day you can do more than the day, who knows? But it is a resource and you should have a right to access it. So I wonder, continuing on this critical reflection about language and maybe even telling off some people from time to time, and the fact that you and Language Snap have been engaging in these conversations that have been challenging these power dynamics in terms of language learning and language spaces. Have you run into any difficulty with people recognizing language as a resource, or challenging the way that you're promoting these multilingual ideological spaces that you're creating?
Absolutely. I think that, it comes from all kind of different people. Sometimes it's just kind of internet trolls, especially when it comes to, I did a real kind of like questioning the idea of like the US as an English speaking country, considering that there were so many languages before English came, and there's so many languages now. Why are we just promoting this one language? That got people angry.
Why do you think that is?
I think that, there is on some level that idea that has kind of always been around with standardized languages, kind of this mapping of like nation state and like who the ideal person is, like, creating this idealized person. And I think that a lot of people feel that English is kind of somehow connected to like national unity, kind of like if we all assimilate, then we'll all be happier together, all of these ideas. And yeah, it's just who's
And
assimilating to
so
whom.
monolingual English speakers and monolingual English speakers are all getting along. Like, that's the problem. It's the language, because everyone who speaks English and only English gets along, right?
You tell me.
Just in case I'm sarcastic. That is not true.
I think that the kind of ideas really annoy some people. And then I think that the whole idea that like language is so often used just as discrimination, like just to discriminate against people. Like, it's not that I don't like them, it's that they have an accent. And all of these little, they're not even microaggressions, they're aggressions that are just so normalized. I think that when some students first hear that, they're kind of like, me, like discriminated against, like, no, 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 I must just be doing something wrong. And it's kind of just really jarring, which
Yeah.
I think kind of makes sense, because I think for a lot of people, I've talked to my students a lot about this, like before they move to the US, they have this idea of like democracy, equality, everyone's equal, there's no discrimination, stuff like that. And so, yeah, it's just hard to kind of grapple with this idea that, maybe all of those things have never been true. Maybe the US just has like the best PR, you know?
Wow.
And so kind of talking about that and like unlearning that has been really difficult. And that's something that in our reading group, we kind of talk a lot about. Kind of, there's always students who are like, like racism does not exist in the US. Like people who live in other countries. I know. And so they're just like so hell bent on this idea. And it's kind of, I mean, it's hard if like your dream is to move to this like idealized country. Like that's hard to grapple with that, the idea you've been sold might be a total lie. So yeah, I think that's whenever it becomes like political or about discrimination and all that stuff, which language is about all of those things,
Hmm.
that's when it becomes tricky.
Tricky's nice. Tricky's a good way to put it. Um, as we're winding down, I'm curious you what you would have told or what you wish you could tell your younger self about language, about language learning. What do you wish you would have known?
I love that question so much because when I was little, I really have memories, and there's so many stories of me kind of refusing to want to speak Spanish, of me just
Mm-hmm.
being like, no, 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 I refuse, I only speak English, and all of these things. And it's a message that I see like 5-year-olds at the playground saying to this day. It's just really there. And so I think that, I would really want to kind of create this bilingual identity where, there's so much good, and it's not just, you're not losing anything. You're just gaining new perspectives. You're able to connect with your heritage. Like you're able to, have your family live through your language, having all of these dichos and all of those things are really nice and sweet. And I think that for a long time, I felt really guilty about having kind of language attrition or language loss in Swiss German. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I was fluent at one point, now it's gone. ¿Qué pasó? And,
Mm-hmm.
realizing that it's so normal or kind of expected. Like it happens to a lot of young kids, especially when they move to other countries. They learn the new language really quickly, but they also lose their first language really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would just tell myself that it doesn't make you less Swiss, it doesn't make you less Colombian, it doesn't make you less American to, be grappling with all of these languages. And I would also tell myself, be really weary of, how in school everything is just so there's one right way of speaking. Be really weary of that because that's not taking into account everything that you can do with language. Like you're really powerful in the sense that, I mean, I am a comedian in Spanish. Like I can say so many jokes and this and that. And yeah, sometimes I mess up with the subjunctive. Wow. And, sometimes that's all that people take away from the conversation. And people will comment on your misuse of the subjunctive. And those are the moments where you have to be like, dame un momentico, because something's off here. I was just doing something really complicated, making jokes, like having a good time in another language. And they're just focusing on the grammatical mistake. Like, no, 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 no. No, absolutely not. And so I would tell myself that.
I love it. I love it. I too mess up in subjunctive. I too have a struggle with it. It's one of those things, but we are whole and complete just as we are. That's fine. It's just part of my journey. You know what I mean? We have a whole lifetime to keep practicing that subjunctive. I initially started language policy consulting with the intention of essentially like demystifying the idea of language policy, because when we hear policies, I know personally, I would pretty much shut down when I was like, policies, yuck, that's serious, or those are things that leaders deal with, or individuals in power. And that's the problem. That just because these people are making these decisions, it does not mean that they are qualified, ready, that they are doing things in their best, in our best interest. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't accidentally, and sometimes they aren't intentionally. And so I want to just start having more conversations about language, about policy, and kind of making it more personal. So essentially, a policy is just a statement, a commitment that you are making towards a particular subject, either as an organization, as an individual. And so if you had to come up with, a policy, a one sentence line about your either attitudes and beliefs or your orientation towards languages, what would be your personal language policy?
I think it would be kind of related to everything that we've spoken about today. Kind of like Language Snaps is all about tackling misconceptions related to standardized languages. Who have accented speech, everyone. Language learning. And the goal is to empower students to be these confident bilinguals who have this shield of, it's not me, it's them, it's these ideologies, and these are the real ways that they show up in the world.
I love it. Fantastic. So we're going to eventually put this on YouTube and maybe some social media. So would you like to share where people can follow you and your team at Language Snaps?
Sure. So we are mainly really active on Instagram, and it's just at Language Snaps. And we also post on Twitter and Facebook, which is also at Language Snaps. And you can find more information about us and the team at our website, which is languagesnaps.com.
Wonderful. And you guys do. You post a lot of good resources. So follow. Thank you so much, Monica. I'm going to pause this.